Today we uncover the shocking truth about UK air fresheners. Millions of people across the country use household aerosols which could unknowingly be making the inside of their homes more polluted than the busy roads outside. The UK home fragrance industry is valued at over £620 million, with some estimates reaching £760 million. And that number just keeps climbing year after year. Due to lack of public awareness, the companies behind it keep cashing in, regardless of what their own products might be doing to the people buying them. Researchers at a leading British university have found that household aerosols, the very same cans and plug-ins lined up on supermarket shelves, now pump out more harmful chemical pollution into the air than every single car, van and lorry on UK roads combined. Not some of the pollution, more than every vehicle in the entire country put together. This household product is in virtually every single home up and down the country right now, and it could be quietly working against your family's health every single day. The US Environmental Protection Agency has found that the air trapped inside an ordinary home regularly runs 2 to 5 times more polluted than the air outside on the street. We shut our windows to keep outdoor pollution out, spray something that smells like cotton or vanilla to make the place feel clean, and end up turning our own living rooms into something closer to a sealed chemical chamber than a sanctuary. It gets worse from there. An investigation into household air fresheners found that the overwhelming majority tested, including ones marketed as natural and unscented, were quietly hiding phthalates, hormone-disrupting chemicals that interfere with how the body produces and regulates its own natural balance. Scientists sometimes call this category of chemical a xenoestrogen, a man-made compound that mimics a hormone the body already produces, throwing the whole system slightly off course without you ever knowing it's happening. And here's the bit that turns this from uncomfortable into genuinely alarming. Some of the very same fragrance chemicals marketed as fresh and clean can react with ordinary ozone already floating around inside your home and transform into formaldehyde right there in your living room air, completely invisible, completely undisclosed on the can, and completely legal. Nobody's pumping formaldehyde into your home on purpose. It's forming itself silently the moment two ordinary household chemicals happen to meet in your living room air. It isn't just one chemical either. People living with multiple chemical sensitivities have described what's sometimes called a cocktail effect, where dozens of different fragrance compounds, propellants and preservatives build up in the body at once, each one seemingly harmless in isolation, but creating reactions that are far harder to predict or untangle once they're all mixing together. At the end of the day, none of these scents are anything close to natural smells. One respected allergist spent decades documenting case after case of children struggling with concentration, with handwriting, even with basic maths at school, only for those struggles to visibly ease once heavy fragrance products were removed from the home. Pregnant women, infants, and elderly relatives come up again and again as the most vulnerable people in the room, the ones whose lungs and developing systems are least equipped to deal with a constant low-level chemical fog. So if these things really are this concerning, you might well be asking yourself why on earth they're still allowed to sit on supermarket shelves right next to the bread and the biscuits, with nothing more than a few lines of tiny grey text on the back. The honest answer is that air fresheners are regulated as cosmetic and chemical products, not as anything to do with health. Which means a manufacturer only has to prove the formula won't cause obvious immediate harm under normal use, not that it's genuinely safe to breathe in continuously for months at a time. The warnings exist purely to satisfy that legal box ticking exercise. They were never designed to actually stop you from buying or using the product. They were designed to protect the company, not you, the moment something eventually goes wrong. So we've gone through the major brands currently sold in UK supermarkets, and we're going to expose the 9 air freshener products you need to think twice about. Then I'll tell you the handful which are actually still worth having in your home. Before we get into it, I want to ask you for something, and it genuinely matters more than you'd think. These companies rely on people staying quiet, scrolling past, never questioning what's printed on the back of the can in tiny grey text nobody bothers to read. Every single time this video gets hit with the hype button, the platform pushes it in front of more people, which means more ordinary households finding out exactly what they've been breathing in for years. That's real pressure on real companies to actually change their formulas instead of hiding behind small print warnings designed to be ignored. It costs you nothing. It takes about 1 second, and it genuinely helps push back against an industry that's been getting away with this for decades. So before you carry on watching, please go ahead and smash that hype button right now. And let's get into it. Number 9. Airwick Freshmatic Automatic Spray. This is the one sitting on a hallway shelf in millions of British homes right now, quietly clicking away every 15 minutes whether anyone's actually in the room or not. The advertising leans heavily on dreamy imagery, rolling countryside, open coastlines, the sort of clean natural landscape that has absolutely nothing to do with what's actually inside the can. Airwick markets it as effortless, continuous freshness lasting up to 70 days without you lifting a finger, the kind of set-and-forget convenience that fits perfectly into a busy household. Sounds brilliant, until you read what Airwick's own UK safety information actually says about the product. It states plainly that the spray may be harmful if directly inhaled, that it's an eye irritant, and that it should only be used in well-ventilated rooms kept well away from sleeping areas. Then it admits in the same breath that it contains propellants, petroleum solvent, and fragrance. Now think about where most people actually put these things: hallways, landings, right outside bedroom doors, because that's exactly where stale smells tend to build up and exactly where you'd want a burst of freshness before guests arrive. The manufacturer is essentially telling you not to position their product near where anyone sleeps, while millions of households place it precisely there night after night for 70 days at a time, completely unaware the instructions even exist. And because the unit fires on a fixed timer, rather than when anyone's actually home, it's dispensing chemical bursts into an empty house for hours on end. Which means the room you walk back into has been quietly accumulating fragrance and propellant the whole time you were out. Number 8. Febreze 3-Voluquin Plug-in. Febreze built its entire reputation on the idea that it doesn't just mask odors, it genuinely fights them at a molecular level. Their 3-Voluquin plugins go a step further, automatically alternating between 3 different scents every 45 minutes because, and this is straight from their own marketing, your nose gets used to a single smell too quickly and stops noticing it after a while. Think about what that actually means. The product is deliberately engineered to keep cycling so your senses never get the chance to adapt, which means you're never actually free of it, even for a moment. Meanwhile, check the safety information printed right there on the box. It causes skin irritation, it causes serious eye irritation, it may cause an allergic skin reaction, and it's officially classified as toxic to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. That last one is a formal legal classification, not marketing language, the kind of label that exists because regulators have decided this chemical genuinely needs a warning attached. Look closer at the small print listing the fragrance ingredients themselves, and you'll often find well over a dozen separate named compounds in a single refill. Things like linalool, limonene, and citronellol, each one capable of triggering a reaction on its own in sensitive individuals, all of them blending together in the same fine mist drifting through your living room. If something's officially toxic enough to harm fish and waterways for the long term, it's worth asking what exactly that same chemical cocktail is doing inside human lungs every 45 minutes, day and night, for up to 90 days a single refill. Number 7. Zoflora. Zoflora has been a fixture of British cleaning cupboards since 1922, originally bought purely as a floor and surface disinfectant, nothing more. But over the last few years, it's been swept up into a viral cleaning trend, with cleaning enthusiasts diluting it down, pouring it into ordinary spray bottles, and misting it through the air purely for the scent, treating a hospital-grade disinfectant like a perfume to be sprayed around the entire house. Zoflora was never designed to be inhaled this way. Its own safety data sheet classifies it as a flammable liquid, an eye and skin irritant, and toxic to aquatic life. The company itself has said the product is safe when used strictly as directed, properly diluted and applied only to surfaces, never sprayed loose into the air. That distinction matters enormously because the moment it leaves a surface and becomes an airborne mist, it's being used in a way the manufacturer never tested for or recommends. The real concern, though, sits with pets. Zoflora's own published PET guidance explains that its active ingredient, a chemical called benzalkonium chloride, becomes permanently bonded to a surface once it's dried, and that cats in particular are at risk. Because they wash themselves constantly, picking the chemical up on their paws and fur and transferring it straight onto the tongue and mouth, where it can cause painful ulceration. A product that British households have trusted for over a century to clean a kitchen floor has quietly become a daily air freshener in homes across the country, used in a way the company itself never actually intended or recommends. Number 6. Glade Shake N-Vac. Some of you will remember the jingle before you remember the product itself, dancing around the living room doing the shake and vac to put the freshness back, one of the most genuinely memorable advert campaigns of its era. The sort of thing that's stuck in the national memory for decades. It's pure nostalgia, a fine powder sprinkled straight onto the carpet before vacuuming it back up. But think for a moment about the actual mechanics of what's happening. You're shaking a heavily perfumed powder deep into carpet fibers, then running a vacuum cleaner straight back over the top of it. Vacuum cleaners aren't sealed units, they're designed to push air through, which means a portion of that fine fragrance dust gets thrown straight back out through the exhaust, right at the height where toddlers crawl and pets breathe. And right where anyone with asthma is most likely to feel the effects almost immediately. Compare that to how our grandparents actually freshened a carpet with plain bicarbonate of soda, left to sit and absorb odors naturally before being swept or vacuumed away, with nothing but its own simple chemistry doing the work and nothing fragrance left hanging in the air afterwards. Glade took that same basic idea and loaded it with synthetic perfume designed to linger in the air for hours after the hoovering's finished. Number 5. Little Tree's Car Freshener. That little cardboard tree hanging off the rearview mirror is one of the most recognizable air fresheners on the entire planet, and it's been swinging there for over 60 years. Instantly familiar even to people who've never bought one themselves, but a car is a small, sealed metal box, and that changes the maths completely. Independent testing of these car trees, including a screening study archived by NASA, found they release a steady stream of terpene compounds into the cabin air the moment they're unwrapped. On their own, these terpenes aren't necessarily the issue. The issue is what happens when they meet ozone, which occurs naturally in both outdoor and indoor air, including the air trapped inside a parked car on a sunny day, where heat from direct sunlight through the windscreen speeds up exactly that kind of chemical reaction. That reaction produces formaldehyde, the very same chemical used in embalming, generated invisibly inside a space roughly the size of a phone box, with you sat breathing it in for the length of an ordinary commute. Crack a window for even a couple of minutes when you've got one of these dangling from your mirror, particularly after the car's been parked in the sun for a while. It genuinely does make a measurable difference to what's actually circulating around your head. Number 4. Febreze Air Effects. Febrez's aerosol range relies on something called cyclodextrin technology, tiny ring-shaped molecules that physically trap odor particles rather than simply blanketing them with something stronger. It's a genuinely clever bit of chemistry, and Febreze leans heavily on it in their advertising, often promoting it as fighting odors rather than just hiding them. The can also proudly states that it uses a natural nitrogen propellant rather than older, harsher gases, which sounds reassuring, but the propellant was never really the problem to begin with. It's what's dissolved into that nitrogen on the way out, the fragrance compounds and preservatives doing the actual scenting, that matters far more than what's pushing the can. Look at the company's own pet safety guidance, and you'll find something genuinely alarming sitting in plain sight. Febreze themselves state that pet birds have specialized lungs that make them uniquely sensitive to what's in the air around them, and they recommend moving your bird to another room entirely until the area has had time to properly ventilate. Read that twice. The manufacturer's telling bird owners to physically evacuate their pet from a room before they spray. If a company is advising you to remove a living creature from a space before using their product, it's worth pausing to ask what that means for the sleeping toddler in the room next door, or the elderly relative dozing on the sofa just a few feet away from where that fine mist is settling onto the curtains, the sofa, and the air around your own dinner table. Number 3. Airwick Pure Aerosol. The word pure is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting on this can. It's positioned as the gentle, almost clinical option, free from the heavier chemical baggage of a standard air freshener. The sort of product you'd reach for if you were specifically trying to avoid harsh chemicals in the home, often sitting right next to the standard range at a near identical price. Flip it over and read the actual safety label printed on the back. It's still officially classified as an extremely flammable aerosol. It still states clearly that it may produce an allergic reaction due to the fragrance ingredients listed underneath. There's nothing about pressurized propellant and petroleum solvent that genuinely earns the word pure in any meaningful sense. This is a branding decision, not a formula change, designed specifically to nudge health-conscious shoppers towards a can that's functionally near identical to the rest of the standard range. Just wrapped in calmer colors with a softer-sounding name printed across the front, charging the same money for a product that's barely changed at all underneath the new label. Number 2. Glade Scents and Spray. This one's marketed as the smart, premium choice, a motion-activated device that only releases fragrance the moment it senses someone walking past, supposedly saving product and only freshening the air when you're actually there to enjoy it. It's particularly popular tucked into small, poorly ventilated downstairs toilets and bathrooms, exactly the kind of cramped space where a sudden chemical mist has absolutely nowhere to go once it's released, which means whoever triggers it is stepping straight into a concentrated cloud with the door already half closed behind them. The irony is sitting right there on the warning label, printed in full view. It instructs users not to breathe the spray directly and to only use the device in a well-ventilated area. But the entire function of a motion sensor is to fire a burst of fine chemical mist the instant it detects movement, which means the exact moment you walk past is the exact moment a fresh dose is released directly into the air you're about to breathe in. A product engineered to time its release perfectly with your presence, carrying a printed warning that essentially tells you not to breathe in the very thing it's been built to spray straight at you. Number 1. Fabulosa and Astonish Scented Disinfectant Sprays. This is the one that should genuinely worry you, because it isn't even about long-term slow building exposure anymore, it's about an immediate physical hazard happening in real time. A cleaning trend spread rapidly across social media, encouraging people to spray cheap scented disinfectants like these directly into the grills of a radiator, supposedly dusting it and fragrancing the entire room at the same time in one quick motion. A trick that looked harmless enough in countless short clips online. The consumer watchdog Which investigated this hack after reports of fires linked directly to the trend, and their scientific advisor confirmed these sprays contain butane, propane and ethanol, all highly flammable, with butane and propane being heavier than air, meaning they can settle and pool in poorly ventilated pockets, exactly like the narrow gaps inside a radiator. One homeowner who tried it ended up with her windows blown clean out and burns across both ankles after the spray ignited without warning, despite believing she'd switched the radiator off beforehand. These cans cost less than £2, which is precisely why the hack spread so quickly among people trying to save money on heating their home and freshening it at the same time, and the safety label printed on the back says, in plain English, to keep the product away from heat, hot surfaces and open flames. A radiator, by its very definition, is all three at once whether it feels warm to the touch in that moment or not. So that's the 9 you need to think twice about. Now let's talk about how you actually find the good stuff instead, because every single one of these alternatives costs next to nothing, several of them you probably already own. And none of them come with a warning label telling you to leave the room before you use them. First, source cleaning and real ventilation. This costs absolutely nothing, and it's the one method every health body keeps coming back to time and time again. Find the actual source of a smell, whether that's a bin that needs emptying, a damp towel, or pet bedding that's overdue a wash, and deal with it directly instead of spraying over the top of it. Then open a window for a few minutes and let real air physically move through the room. Remember that small print line we mentioned earlier, the one admitting air fresheners do not replace good hygiene practices. And remember that statistic about indoor air running 2 to 5 times more polluted than the air outside. A few minutes of genuine airflow does more to actually reset a room, and unlike everything on the avoid list, it'll never appear on a hazard label of its own. Second, bicarbonate of soda, an old-fashioned staple that costs pennies and almost certainly sits in your kitchen cupboard right now already. It works through simple chemistry, helping to neutralize certain odors rather than masking them with perfume, which is exactly why it's so good at dealing with strong smells in the fridge, in bins, and in shoes. Leave an open container at the back of the fridge to deal with lingering food smells. Sprinkle a little into trainers overnight, work it gently into carpets before vacuuming, or keep some dusted into a litter tray to take the edge off. A single box costs a fraction of what most plug-in refills cost, and it'll quietly outlast several cans of anything sold as a dedicated air freshener. It's completely scentless on its own, costs almost nothing, and it's safe to have around children and pets without a second thought. Third, traditional stovetop simmer pots. This is the genuinely original home fragrance method used long before pressurized cans ever existed. Take a pot of water, add orange or lemon peel, a sliced apple, a cinnamon stick, and a few whole cloves. Then let it gently simmer away on the hob, topping up the water as it slowly reduces. Some households build on this with a few dried cloves of their own, a sprig of rosemary, or even a handful of dried lavender thrown into the same pot for something a little different. Plenty of people do exactly the same thing in a slow cooker, left running quietly all day. Instead of the hob, which fills the entire house with a warm, completely natural scent, using nothing but real plant matter, no propellants, no synthetic fragrance, no hidden allergens printed in tiny letters on a can. While you're at it, an open bowl of plain vinegar, or even a bowl of dried coffee grounds left out in a room overnight, does a surprisingly good job of pulling stubborn smells out of the air too. And if you've got pets in the house, particularly cats, it's worth knowing that strong citrus and certain herb oils aren't always well tolerated by them, so keep portions modest and the room properly ventilated while it's simmering away. Fourth, beeswax candles. A genuine traditional alternative to the heavily scented candles most of us grew up with, the majority of which are made from petroleum-derived paraffin wax loaded with synthetic fragrance, to give it any scent at all. Pure beeswax doesn't need that synthetic fragrance pumped into it to smell pleasant. It carries its own gentle, naturally occurring honey note as it burns. And it burns considerably cleaner overall than a heavily perfumed paraffin candle stacked with artificial scent compounds and dye. A decent beeswax candle costs more upfront than a supermarket multipack, but it tends to burn slower and last considerably longer, which narrows the price gap a lot more than it first appears once you actually compare them side by side over a few months. Fifth, activated bamboo charcoal bags. Rather than fighting a bad smell by overpowering it with something stronger, these work through simple physics rather than chemistry. The charcoal itself is incredibly porous, and that structure physically draws moisture, bacteria, and odor molecules out of the surrounding air and locks them inside rather than simply covering the smell up with something else. They're completely odorless themselves, safe to leave around pets, and most last for months at a time tucked into a wardrobe, a shoe cupboard, or the boot of a car, simply needing an occasional spot of direct sunlight every few weeks to recharge and keep working. Once a bag finally reaches the end of its life, the charcoal itself can usually be tipped straight into the garden or a houseplant pot rather than the bin, working its way back into the soil instead of ending up in landfill the way an empty aerosol can always will. Sixth, air purifying houseplants. Back in 1989, NASA ran a now widely referenced clean air study, testing how effectively a range of common houseplants could filter certain pollutants out of a sealed test chamber under laboratory conditions. Plants like spider plants, peace lilies, snake plants, and rubber plants performed particularly well in that environment. And they're all widely available and fairly forgiving to look after, even if you don't consider yourself especially green-fingered. A single pot sitting on a windowsill isn't going to transform your home's air quality overnight on its own. But a handful dotted around the living room and bedroom, ideally kept in clay pots rather than plastic ones, give you a living, ongoing presence in the room instead of yet another disposable can destined for landfill in a matter of weeks. Just be a little careful which varieties you bring into a home with cats, since certain popular houseplants, lilies in particular, can be genuinely harmful to them if nibbled. So it's always worth checking a specific plant before it goes anywhere a curious cat can reach it. One more old-fashioned trick worth mentioning while we're on the subject. A couple of drops of real vanilla flavoring dabbed onto a cold light bulb, left to warm gently once the lamp switched on, fills a room with a soft, comforting bakery sort of scent using nothing but a bottle of vanilla you probably already have in the baking cupboard. It costs next to nothing to try, and it's the sort of small, practical swap that adds up over time once you start looking at everything currently plugged into your walls. So there you have it. 9 air fresheners genuinely worth thinking twice about, and 6 honestly better ways to keep your home smelling the way you want it to, without quietly turning your living room into an unregulated chemical experiment every single day. None of this means you need to throw out every single thing in your cupboard overnight, but it's worth knowing exactly what's printed on the back of the can the next time you reach for one, rather than just trusting the picture on the front. If this opened your eyes even a little, that hype button really does help push this video in front of more people who need to see it, and every single tap genuinely adds pressure on these companies to do better. So please go ahead and smash it now if you haven't already. And let me know down in the comments which food or household product you think we should expose next, because I genuinely read every single one, and a lot of our best ideas come straight from you, the viewers. If you want more videos like this one, make sure you're subscribed because there's plenty more of this coming. Until next time, stay sharp, stay informed, and protect your plate.